Hello, fellow Toolboxers. Welcome to episode number 318 of the Immigration Lawyers Toolbox podcast. I think it's one of the first ones we're doing after the AILA conference. If I saw you at the AILA conference and I didn't get a chance to follow up since then, please email me because I may have lost some cards or some people were supposed to contact me, haven't. I know there was like dozens of listeners there that I ran into. Please let me know. I love connecting with y'all. And I also want to thank our sponsors. One of the main sponsors of AILA over there is e-Immigration by Serenade, one of the top softwares, if not the top software for immigration law practitioners, for case management, practice management, and a lot more. They have so many add-ons and new AI features they're having. It's really good. Definitely, they sponsored a couple of events there, so they had a lot of information. But definitely contact them to set up a time to just go through the software, see what it is, and get a feel for yourself. Great team there, a great leadership team. I know them well, very, very good people. Having said that, let's jump into it. I have Carl. Was it Risch?
Correct.
Or Risch? Risch? Okay.
Yes.
Well, good to meet you. Carl is part of the Kurzban, Tetzeli and Pratt law firm. Everyone knows them, obviously, Kurzban law firm. And Kevin Gregg is a monthly guest on our show. We've talked to different partners there. We got to notice that Carl, first of all, your background is really interesting, which is the main reason I want you here. But you're also starting the DC branch of the firm. So I want to get on to that. Could you just start with us, letting us know more about you and how you got involved in State Department and then immigration law? I'd love to know more about that.
Sure. Happy to be here. So I have a long career in government. Most of my career regarding immigration has been on the government side. I was a private practice attorney in Pennsylvania, not in immigration, primarily in my 20s and my early 30s. I was a foreign service officer. I was a consular officer in my late 20s. During 9/11, I was a consular officer in the Netherlands, which got my interest in immigration, really doing visa adjudications long ago. Pivoted back to government at age 36, went to the Administrative Appeals Office where I worked primarily on L's and
we got to talk about that. Okay. I didn't know the AO part.
Yeah, I spent a long time at the AO, was an adjudicator, then a manager there. Then went overseas with the USCIS, where I was an adjudicator in the Philippines, and then field office director in Seoul, Korea. And then I was quite content being a career USCIS officer. But then when the Trump administration took over, one of my friends from my early days as an associate in Pennsylvania was a guy named Francis Cisna, who ultimately became the director of USCIS. I was asked to curtail my assignment in Korea to come back to USCIS with the idea that I would work in the front office as a career official, helping Francis as he went through the nomination process and eventually became the director of USCIS. As things happen, though, in life, during my early days in Washington working in the administration, it was discovered I had a background in consular work, and I was asked to consider a nomination to be Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs. Having been both a career USCIS and career consular officer, there was interest in having a career official pivot over there that could then kind of work with USCIS and try to harmonize standards and try to improve the relationship between the two agencies. So I accepted that and was confirmed by the Senate in 2017 and served in that capacity for 3.5 years, resigning then upon my selection into the Senior Executive Service, where I went over to DOJ to be the Deputy Director of the Executive Office for Immigration Review, EOR, for a short period of time, and then I pivoted to private practice. And then I became a partner at Mayer Brown, a big international law firm here in Washington. And during that time, I got to know Ira Kurzban. So Ira and I were co-counsel on a few cases in late 2021, and we began working together, collaborating on difficult consular matters, and we just developed a friendship and rapport. He became a bit of a mentor to me. I got to know the other partners at the Kurzban firm, and eventually started talking about this possibility. And it was a tremendous opportunity for me personally and professionally to be able to do something like this with Ira and his partners. And we're here now, Farragut Square, in our DC location for the Kurzban firm.
So there's so much to talk about. So let's back up. So you mentioned 3 embassies. There's South Korea, Netherlands, and the Philippines. Were you at any other embassies?
Not on a full-time basis. So I traveled to close to 50 different consular sections as the assistant secretary, which was part of my job. But I did quite a bit of refugee processing as well. As both an international officer, but also as a detailee on TDY, I did refugee processing. So I got to pass through embassies and consulates in Africa and in Pakistan and Malaysia and Thailand to do a variety of refugee circuit rides.
And then in Philippines, that's one of the busiest numbers wise that's happening. What are the main issues you saw in Filipino cases happening? What issues did you typically run into?
Right. So I was with the USCIS office, which is now closed in Manila, the U.S. Embassy. But the primary purpose of that embassy, or that USCIS office in the embassy at the time, was to accept and adjudicate I-407s for people abandoning their green cards, which are now a mail-in process primarily. They accepted I-130s for filing, direct consular filing there, or direct filing with USCIS, and then handed over to the consular section. And I-360s. It's a very, very busy post for widows and widowers seeking immigration benefits as well. Probably one of the busiest posts in the world for that purpose. Certainly at the time for filing overseas, it was quite busy. And then things like humanitarian reinstatement and a variety of issues. But I found where USCIS added the most value abroad was having experienced officers that could liaise with the consular section and be a resource for consular. I worked with consular a few times to remove erroneous entries of inadmissibility and other things that were not really achievable if you didn't have a USCIS officer present in the embassy.
How would someone in those, I mean, they essentially, for those who know, they shut down this stuff. Trump shut down all these international offices, and they're very, very slowly kind of rebuilding it at a snail's pace, essentially. I think there's one or two small, like, international offices they have now. How would someone have reached out for you to fix it when there was erroneous stuff going on?
Yeah, it's just knowing the consular officers, being available to them.
They would ask you and ask for clarification and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I was just right there, really embedded within the consular section, right next door to the consular section, which of course was massive in the Philippines. We were just 2 officers in USCIS compared to dozens upon dozens of consular officers.
Do you think it was a bad idea to, especially some offices like the Philippines, to shut that down, the international USCIS office, or is it possible for USCIS domestic to handle the same thing?
That's a great question, right? So I spent a lot of time talking about that when I was in government, both when I was with USCIS, with the field offices, as well as when I was assistant secretary. And the reason why I was involved was because a lot of the work that USCIS stopped doing when it closed international offices was absorbed by the consular section. Because under a delegation of authority, consular can perform a lot of those functions. So it became a difficult situation to justify financially the existence of USCIS offices abroad, because so much can be delegated to consular, and then consular is paid under the Economy Act to perform some of these functions for USCIS. There's people within USCIS very often want to keep these offices open. They try to justify it financially, but it's really difficult to do that.
I see.
And the argument I made, even way back when I attended a field office directors conference when I was a field office director in Seoul, was that there needs to be a strategy to try to justify the preservation and perhaps expansion of the USCIS presence abroad, because at the time it didn't provide a lot of services I felt that were really needed, like biometrics capturing. There was just a stubborn refusal to really open itself up to that, but yet at the same time tried to continue to provide services that they could pay consular to do for them, like accept and adjudicate I-130s. So they didn't listen to me, right? And eventually the Trump USCIS leadership took a look at these international offices and went back and forth a while and concluded they felt that they were superfluous. And they took steps to shut them down. They kept a few open. And I know that the current directors announced, I think, a few more were opening back up, or different places. I think.
Sort of South Latin America was one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the original footprint didn't make a lot of sense, right? It was a legacy footprint that was inherited when DHS was formed, and
Mhm.
USCIS ended up with offices. Had one office in South America, Lima, but no office in Brazil. They had an
Yeah.
office in Accra, but no office in Nigeria. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just kind of just they got whatever was left over and tried to justify keeping them in these particular cities, and it was just not it wasn't planned out, right? They just kind
Yeah.
of ended up with it. And I think there was just a failure of leadership to preserve and protect those and justify their existence both financially and for policy reasons.
Yeah.
And
I mean, with the current backlogs in the Philippines, for example, people are waiting years for an interview, even for like a family case that's very simple. So having extra resources in one way or fashion, especially US office, I think there would be helpful. And you mentioned not being in Nigeria, but being Accra doesn't Nigeria being the size of America population wise, there's so much demand. Now let's go to AEO. What years were you at the AEO?
2006 until 2013.
Okay, so I started practicing like in 2010-ish, focus on immigration, and I went back and 2013 as well. I've read every single AO decision, L1 in particular. So I've read all your work. 23. I stopped reading. I started losing my mind because it's just the same thing over again. What could you tell us behind the scenes? What's going on? I've read all your work. What is there anything? I didn't even know what question to ask. It's kind of exciting having the person who's helping write. What was your role? Was you kind of proofreading them or just giving your input? What was going on there?
No, I was an author from 2006 until 2009. So I was working L1s
Hmm.
and EB1Cs primarily. First, and L1As and L1Bs. There was a massive backlog when I came on. I think some of the appeals have been sitting there for 3 or 4 years
Wow.
that I was working. It was very difficult, even after I became a supervisor and an editor in 2009, to sustain an appeal as an adjudicator at the AAO. It was just always sort of swimming against a current. I guess you just felt like you were pushing up against a resistant policy. And the reason why was there was concern that whenever one sustained an appeal, that the facts and the justification would be misused by you, right? Someone who reads them and shares them. And the idea I had at the time as an editor was, why don't we just sustain appeals without any explanation? Just do just overturn it and don't explain it. Because I saw a lot of cases as a writer and an editor that I felt should be reversed, right? They should be the denial was not appropriate for a variety of reasons, and the institution didn't like that. I do believe they preserve that. They've adopted that. I think it's a little easier to get a case to the AAO than it was, say, in 2006 or 2007 when I started. But back then, even then, the AAO was a tip of the spear when it came to telework. It was one of the first U.S. government agencies or offices to permit telework, even back during the INS days.
Mm-hmm.
People with the AAO or the AAU or whenever changed names were able to work from home. And then when I started, it was a big part of the culture and their recruiting strategy. So they were way ahead of the rest of the U.S. government and the rest of USCIS on telework. But it's still a big part of their culture there.
I read all the cases, and for a period of time, I'm part of this immigration lawyers toolbox out. Every month it'd come out. I read all the L1 EB1Cs, and I do an hour synopsis of the nuances of it. I just couldn't get enough of an audience to listen to justify how much time I was spending on it. But it made me an L1 expert because, like, you see, when you want to, it's more of the denials because it was always up picking apart when they primarily is this a job? I don't do L's anymore because it just became too much of a hassle because we get our fees, you get denial, go AO. AO would agree with me, particularly because I know what words to use, but they wouldn't sustain it anymore. They'll just resend it to USCIS, which would lead to another RFE, which is the bogus RFE, and you go in a circle. So I do want to ask you whether just going the lawsuit route and bypassing AO is better. But just for those listening, just reading all your decisions, I see where you'd pick apart and have problems with the case. And a lot of times I do with the job description, looking too much like a day-to-day operation. So you got to be very careful with the wording you use in the employment letters and stuff like that. There's indication that there's, if you're military, if it's a basic soldier kind of works at a general, that they'll get you on that and there's no coming back. So that skill from reading all your writings really helped me out. So I didn't know who to say thank you to, but thank you so much. I've learned so much from your work. So what is your opinion on just bypassing? I mean, as you said, it's different than it was back in 2013, 29. But more and more immigration lawyers are bypassing AEO and just going straight to federal lawsuits. Is that, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's some reason to preserve the original filing because the date of filing is important, or there's something. If you can refile, I would refile,
Yeah.
or sue on the decision, right? I
Yeah.
mean, going to the AAO. I mean, I haven't filed it. I filed one AAO appeal in my now over almost 3.5 years of practice. I mean, that's because usually it's proved, right? So we don't have a lot of denials to begin with. But even among colleagues, I find it very difficult to justify filing an appeal with the AAO.
Yeah, I hear you. So, okay, so AEO, and with regard to getting your position with state, how was the process of, I didn't realize it was one of those positions where the Senate has to prove it. How
Yeah.
nerve was it? Under which administration? Is this the Obama administration?
No, the Trump administration.
Trump administration. A lot of times these are like witch hunts and stuff. Is that something you underwent, or wasn't that kind of an issue for you because you're a career service officer?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I had a very fast confirmation process. It started in late spring. I was confirmed by the beginning of August, before the August recess. I mean, I had been identified, went through vetting, had a hearing, was confirmed, all during the time during which, say, Francis Cisna was in the process of being in confirmation. And he was confirmed months after I was confirmed. It was just a much more controversial nomination. I'd been a career officer for, at that point, 15 years, something like that, off and on, different roles. So I don't, and also I'd worked for both Consular and USCIS. So I went through confirmation pretty painlessly.
Wonderful. So, but now I know someone who's been in the highest levels of government that's in this. So good to meet you. I can always say I know someone who went through the Senate confirmation process. So, what are the goals now? So, with Kurtzman's firm, you started. You've launched the DC office. The location is really critical for the kind of work you do. What are the goals in establishing this new office?
Yeah, so IRA, has a nationwide presence, particularly as does Helena and Kevin and John Pratt and Eddie, the other partners. So the idea is to have a DC focused practice. A lot of what I do is, of course, immigration law, but because of my background in government and my senior position in government, I find that my presence in Washington, D.C. is essential to keep up the necessary connections and understand the sort of the political aspects of what I do. A lot of my clients have political issues as well as immigration issues. So I find that being in Washington, having a Washington focused practice is very important. And the idea is to have a Washington presence and to bring that kind of gravitas to the Kurtzman firm.
Wonderful. So, I'll leave with this one question. I also want, if someone wants to contact you, ask about the best way to reach you. But you've just seen so much of the world and behind the scenes of it. So, like, of the stuff immigration lawyers are dealing face to face. Is there a thing or two you could just give us advice on kind of life and business of? It's kind of a vague question, just popped in my head, but like you just have probably so much knowledge and experience. I guess let's go immigration lawyers. Is there any advice you have from being behind the scenes that would help us better as practitioners in getting to our goals and supporting our clients?
Yeah, I mean, much of what I'm doing currently, because I was the assistant secretary for consular affairs, there's a lot of interest in me advising on consular adjudications. I've been both the senior leader of the bureau as well as a window adjudicator. I've done all these jobs from the I wouldn't say the lowest, but the actual operational adjudicatory work all the way to senior policymaking. And what I remind people is that the individuals making these decisions are human beings, and understanding them, their lifestyle, their adjudicatory techniques, their training, the pressure that they're under to work quickly. I see a lot of mistakes made with colleagues, particularly back in my old firm when I first started. Everything they wrote for the consular section, it looked like something they were preparing for the Supreme Court. It's like a brief with citations, and because that's how we were trained. And I said, you got to imagine it's like you're you're arguing with somebody about issuing stamps at the post office, or you're dealing with the DMV. I mean, you gotta. I mean, you might have a lot of respect for consular and consular officers and the law, but the atmosphere and the way they're making decisions, it's very different, I think, than what people imagine. It's very rapid. It's and as we know, there's very little accountability. So particularly even less after the Supreme Court decision recently. So they're making decisions quickly and sometimes erroneously, and making it as simple as possible for them, both the law as well as the facts and the argument, I think is a much better strategy. I tell clients, keep it at a page. Don't give me 3 pages of information.
Yeah.
You can't explain it in a page to a consular officer. It's unlikely that they're going to read it. And mistakes happen, and practitioners should not be afraid to reach out to consular sections and point out these mistakes, with the understanding that, again, these are officers that are not full-time adjudicators. Unlike USCIS, consular officers rotate through consular positions. They work in different countries, but very often the officer who's adjudicating a visa, that 2-year period that he or she is doing that work is the only time they'll ever do it. After that, they'll become political officers or economic officers. Unlike USCIS, where you may find somebody who's sitting in the Nebraska Service Center who's been adjudicating the exact same case type for 20 years. They know everything about it. So not saying one is more professional than the other, but it's a different way of approaching a case and explaining a case.
It's less formal. Yeah. I mean, I see lawyers sometimes do that. Sometimes in front of their clients, they want to look like they're doing more lawyering, but it's more casual than that. One problem we've been facing, it's gotten more and more difficult to even contact the embassy. They've made different barriers, taken away. NBC doesn't have a lawyer email anymore. Some embassies, you got to go through this page that goes through this, like press this, ends up going nowhere.
Navigator.
Navigator. Just that one was like when they pushed that on us, I'm like, oh man. So that's frustrating. And then LegalNet is just its own thing. I just don't even find value. The best way to try to connect with the consular, just do it there. Because if you go to LegalNet, it's just not. They're really just going to say go back to the officer said, unless it's really egregious, like legal error, which usually isn't that egregious. It's just a factual error or something.
Yeah, and it varies, right? I mean, some offices. Yeah, I mean, I find London to be very responsive, right? They have a box that you email, you send it to them, they get back to you. Maybe not what you want to hear, but they do respond, they do read it. Yeah. I think other posts are not nearly as organized around checking those emails. So they are transitioning to this navigator. I just had a case in Australia where the consular section erroneously found somebody inadmissible for a crime involving moral turpitude, even though they were never convicted. They never admitted to anything. It was just an arrest. Yeah. So I thought, well, this is definitely a mistake. I told the client, just sit tight. We're going to, reach out and see what we can do here. So I went to contact them, and indeed, they force you through this navigator, and it flat out says, when you finally get to the page where you want to say something, it says, if you're complaining about a visa denial, we're going to delete this and not read it. So it was frustrating. Eventually, I found a way to get the message to them, sort of through just basically emailing people that I know, and they eventually did reverse it. But that's a flaw in the system, right? There needs to be a way to communicate these types of service errors or erroneous decisions that really are unjust. There has to be a way to do this other than LegalNet, other than writing a letter or calling a congressman or something like that. Yeah. It just sucks up so much resources, and indeed they want to fix the mistakes like that, right? They want to, if you get to the right person.
They got to have a lawyer specialized, because I see when I have clients who come to me and they've contacted the consular through an email and they send like a 10-page email that's just ranting, and I'm like, they probably get so much of that they're frustrated, so they're like, we'll just cut it off. But like it's like it needs to be a system that's efficient, but probably, I guess, tied to lawyers. It sucks because people have to hire a lawyer then to try to get through it. But I see when people do it themselves, it just creates more work for consulars. So I see what's going on their side. They're frustrated, but at the same time, there's just way too many errors in the aggregate that happen. It's probably, less than 1%, but for that percent of people, which is thousands and thousands of people, it's like, it destroys their lives, and some people just, especially if they don't have a lawyer, they'll think the consular's right. They just go with it, and they lose up on the chance to get a visa or a green card just because they don't know how to fight it. And that's a shame. But it's a complicated system. I mean, you saw behind the scenes, it's not easy to fix. Even stuff like L's. For many years, I was trying, how can we make a system where it's not so subjective of what a true manager or executive is. And it just, if you make one system here, it won't work for a certain type of company. If you do this, it's inevitably, it always comes into this subjective judgment of whether this person is truly a manager or executive. And I couldn't figure out a way to make it less, more objective. It's so hard to create that. It's just going to be up to interpretation inevitably.
Yeah, and sometimes you just get unlucky and you get an adjudicator that has a particularly harsh view of that.
Yeah,
and it is difficult to get that uniformity and predictability around the decision making. Absolutely.
sure.
But I can say, I mean, I've been around been an adjudicator, managed adjudicators, worked with adjudicators for a long time, and I can tell you, both in Consular and at USCIS, the vast majority of adjudicators want to do a good job. They really do. They want to. And I've become pretty good at looking at proposed filings and ideas and floating different ideas about what might work, what might not work. I feel I've developed a pretty good sense of, I don't think this is going to fly. I probably would have definitely RFE'd, maybe denied this one. But I'm not 100% either. There's a few that I'm surprised that this one we had trouble with this. And at the same time, I'm a little surprised, wow, that went through easier than I thought.
Yeah.
Even I'm not 100%, because there are, there's just different ways of seeing things.
And these filings are now 1,000 pages for L1s, because they want so many AB1C, and they want so many different things. And once something becomes 1,000 pages, then it's hard to even figure out what's going on. We send, especially when they want to duplicate, where you have to send 2 big boxes of paper for an L1, and then they come back RFE and say, we didn't send this document. We're like, what do you mean it was there? Page 850 of 1,000, but it's like they're not going to see that. So then there's just a practical aspect of how do you even analyze so much data. Maybe the AI stuff is going to fix it up. I don't know, but it's just a hard thing to do. So I do appreciate the other side of it, but it's crazy. It's a crazy job that we do, and but it's interesting and fun at the same time. I appreciate it so much for coming on. If someone want to reach out to you in the firm, what's the best way to do that?
Just we go to our website, the kktplaw.com. There's my bio is there, my email is there. That's usually the easiest way to reach me.
Wonderful. I appreciate you coming to the show. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Anytime.